Welcome back to another Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indianapolis Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
We are back in our homes on this Tuesday afternoon, but this morning we were at the Mollenkoff Athletic Center we're always on campus on Saturday morning every weekday morning watching football practice. At least we have been for the last couple of weeks. The weather forced Purdue inside for practice number 16, but preseason camp, at least the days that they're calling camp, actually ends on Wednesday, and then they have a couple more days of practice this week before things start the actual game day on Monday. So we thought we should just do sort of a position by position rundown here, give you a look at how we feel like the two deep has come together. And Sam, I think what I'm getting to the end of camp, I can tell you who Purdue's best players are relative to each other, but it's very difficult in a vacuum to tell you who are the good players right now relative to a Big Ten schedule. And I think some of that is just by the nature of it, but also some of it is I don't know that I've seen people that are just like tearing it up within their position group, dominating a position group regularly enough to make me think, okay, that person is definitely one of the best players in the Big Ten at their position.
Yeah, and I said this exact thing at practice inside Mollenkoff here Tuesday morning. I was like, I don't know how good these guys are because we're seeing the same players compete against the same players on their own team, which are basically a team of guys who all left their previous schools mostly or are incoming freshmen and came to Purdue. It's nearly an entirely new roster, and it's hard to gauge. I mean, like you said, we can tell who's doing well consistently in practice against the same guys that they're competing against daily in drills or when they do 11-on-11 stuff on the other side of the ball. But I'm eager for this Ball State game, mostly because I want to see these guys play against somebody else. And yes, Ball State is a MAC school. It should be a lesser opponent, and maybe you don't learn a whole lot, but I just want to see them compete against somebody else than what they've become used to the last 3 weeks.
Well, that's what we were saying at the end of camp last year, and it turns out that Indiana State game told us absolutely nothing about this team. It told us that they could beat a 1AA or FCS team. It did not tell us necessarily that they could only beat an FCS team, but that's how it turned out. And these early season things can be a little bit hard to just make predictions off of. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go position by position. We're going to give you a little glimpse of what we believe the two deep to be, more or less. And then we're going to give you sort of not a grade, but kind of an evaluation. And the four categories that I came up with were elite. I don't think you're probably going to hear us say elite very much. Solid, shaky, and concerning. And two things I'll say about this. Number one, all of that is, in my mind, we don't have a specific standard for each of those things. It's just whatever Sam and I think. But all that is relative to a program that was 1-11 last year and is building back towards something. So it's not, if you were covering Alabama or Clemson or Ohio State or Georgia, and you were doing this same exercise, you would have a higher standard for solid than what we probably have here. I think solid to me is more like, it looks like they have depth. It looks like they have some experience, capable guys. They're making plays in practice. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily top of the Big Ten. So that, number one. Number two, as we go through the two deep here, we're going to have limited transparency as it comes to injuries. And, we've been at every practice. There are rules as to what can be reported when as far as players are in and out. So we're going to give you the two deep that it would be, with the caveat that there are some guys, and some of them we can't talk about yet, that are nursing some things, and I don't want to tell you for sure whether or not they are or are not going to be active for opening day. There aren't a lot of long-term injuries. It's not like we're covering up, Devin Maccabee's out for the year. That's not what's going on here. There's just general football bumps and bruises, and there's a policy as to what you're allowed to report and whatnot, because Purdue gives us that access, but not every team gives that access, and they get to make some rules along those lines. So having said all that, I want to somewhat anticlimactically, Sam, start on special teams, because I'm going to save the juicier stuff for later. But I also think this is a area of the game where I think Purdue can make a difference this season. And some of it is personnel. I think they have some solid personnel, but some of it, a lot of it, is James Shebist, who's a guy who has done this and succeeded and had really good special teams units elsewhere. It was a big reason. He was able to, as soon as he got to UNLV, put some guys in the right spot and make a difference there. Now he had some really good talent to do it with, but I can see a similar thing potentially happening here. It's a unit that overall I'm kind of giving the benefit of the doubt right now, just based on the personnel they'll put there and the personnel who's overseeing it.
Yeah, last week when we had a chance to talk to Barry Odom, I just said, what is the advantage of having a James Shebist on your staff? And he said pretty bluntly, I think he's the best special teams coach in all of football. He didn't say in college. He didn't say he just said all of football, blanket statement. And, the guy's won multiple special teams coordinator of the year awards in various conferences or from different publications throughout his career. And that is an area that teams that he's been at in the past have had an advantage. And I think, quite frankly, if you're Purdue and you're trying to win, 3 or 4 games, which seems like a significant upgrade from where you were, that's an area where you can maybe pick off an opponent with a big play in a game that turns it with a return or a trick play on special teams, whatever it might be. So I definitely think that there is value in the special teams with Purdue, and we've seen how much this team emphasizes at practice special teams more than any team I've seen. They make it a big point of emphasis that special teams are going to be important for what we do. And, I posted that on X last week, and people were like, yeah, because they're going to have to punt all the time, or they're going to be receiving a lot of kickoffs, and maybe they will. But even so, this team is going to be readily prepared for those situations because they do emphasize punting, kicking, return game, even, at times, maybe taking advantage of a formation that the other team has where you feel like you can get kind of a cheap first down, whatever it might be.
It's damning with faint praise to say, well, sure, a team that doesn't have a very good offense that has a really good punting game is better than one that doesn't have a really good punting game. Of course it is. But for me, it's the idea that anytime that you've ever asked a head coach after a play or a special teams coordinator, like you come in for your Monday interviews after there was a big play on Saturday, or maybe you ask in the post game on Saturday, hey, like where did that fake come from? Where did that play that you made they say, well, our special teams coordinator saw something on film, and so they spent that week hoping that they would have a chance to exploit it. And sometimes it happens. Sometimes the opportunity never comes. Sometimes the opportunity comes and you screw the play up and it doesn't work. But I think that everything we've ever heard about James Shebist and this reputation he has in college football, I think they are going to be in position. You look at, again, those games that are definitely going to you would think be in the margins. Northwestern, Rutgers, games like that, where you're not playing one of the elite of the Big Ten. Those games can turn sometimes on just one play. So let's grade the whole thing. We'll just give one special teams grade, but here's how we the consensus we came to on the two deep. It's a little bit straightforward, but kicker is the one that we're not 100% sure of, Spencer Porath or Seth Turner. But I think it's also possible that one guy kicks off, one guy does field goals. I think it's also possible that if it's a quote unquote regular field goal, Spencer Porath goes out. If you need a big foot, a big leg, maybe it's Seth Turner who kicked the 56-yarder in practice last week. Punter, Sam Dugwig himself told us Jack McAllister is going to win that job. So we're going to take his word for that. And it's a veteran guy, Washington, Nebraska, makes sense. And then kick returner, the guy that they've talked up a lot in that regard is Michael Jackson III. We've also seen Armand Branch back there. They've got some other guys, Jesse Watson, Malachi Thomas, probably some other guys we could name. But they are not taking their most potentially dynamic skill guys and not putting them on special teams.
Right.
They're not we've seen teams do that before, where it's like, well, we got to protect that guy from special teams. And Purdue does seem to be saying, those are our best football players. We're going to put our best football players on the field in that capacity. So I'm going to call this I'm going to give this a solid grade. And that's on the what is the Purdue scale at this point in time. But I do think it's a position that instead of being a potential week-to-week issue, this could be a week-to-week strength, even if everything else doesn't come together, that this is a place where they can have positive plays on a regular basis.
Yeah, the one thing that I could not go elite here because we've seen some inconsistency with the field goals and things of that sort. And there's always going to be inconsistencies, especially early in camp. But I think there's just too much coaching savviness of being a long-time special teams coordinator. It's not like it's a guy that's coached tight ends at one place and then moved to another school and coached offensive line. And then now over the years, he's become a special teams coach. No, special teams is what he does. And James Shebas, is the best at it. So I think there's just too much coaching savviness here to think it's anything less than solid, regardless of who the players are, because I think they're going to put the right guys in the position to succeed. We see at a lot of places you put a defensive backs maybe a number 2 defensive back on the kickoff return team and let them touch the ball. And instead, it seems like Purdue's going with guys who are used to having the ball in their hands and making plays are going to be the guys that are return men. You've got a veteran punter in McAllister. The kicking game, you've got guys who have kicked before. Spencer Porath went through, an up and down freshman season last year, but is he better off for it? Because now he's got that experience and he's been through a year of college football. All that to, kind of say I'm in agreement with you that I think it's probably a solid unit.
And listen, I think sometimes college kickers are victimized by people comparing them to NFL kickers, because we do that at every position, right? Like, it's the guy who is the best at that position will go on to the NFL. But like the precision of NFL kickers is impossible to replicate in college across 150 teams or whatever it is. So that's something to keep in mind. But we've also seen Purdue, especially 2 years ago, have place kicking that was quite simply not adequate. So this, I think, is better. I do think they at least have a couple of options that they trust, and that's helpful. That's probably as much time as we need to spend on special teams. Let's go to defense. It's been a fairly straightforward look, at least as the ones go, throughout most of camp. Let's start up front. The defensive ends with the ones very consistently, Trey Smith and CJ Madden. And pretty consistently, CJ Nunnally has been with the twos, and Breon Ishmael a lot with the twos, and there'll probably be some other guys who have cycled in there. But Sam, what'd you give that grade? Just the defensive ends, the rush ends, and that sort of quadrant of guys.
It probably would have been, if we were doing this after the first couple of practices, it probably would have been higher. I think the offensive line has come around a little bit since then, but early on, and I think we talked about this before, I felt like the quarterbacks were just getting sacked way too much or under pressure way too much.
But some of that was the quarterback play as well.
Correct. I really like CJ Madden's size. I think there's value in having an experienced all-conference college football player from the MAC and CJ Nunnally being on your second team or being a guy that's going to rotate in there. Trey Smith is the one that surprised me maybe initially, that he was, running with the ones pretty exclusively, but he's proven that he's capable. The coaches are going to put the guy they think is the best one out there that gives them a chance to win. And then Breon Ishmael has played for a national championship team or was a member of a national championship team at Michigan. So I think this is another solid group just when you got that mix of guys and, maybe the ability to filter in 4 different guys so you can keep a fresh approach, fresh attack on the quarterbacks. The one thing that I haven't seen yet that maybe is concerning is when these guys have to go out and cover the flats, get in pass coverage, things like that. I know they were practicing it the other day because I sat there and watched Trey Smith go through it and get lectured a couple times, but that's the area where I want to see, if they're capable of holding down the fort there.
So I give this a shaky, partially because I found myself giving out a lot of solids, and I didn't want solid to not start to mean anything. but also it's because the standard for this position is a little bit higher. And I think if you're talking about judging groups by whether or not they can help push Purdue up, then what you have to have is a rush end who really gets after it, really kind of terrorizes people. And we don't see full live action. The quarterbacks aren't live for sure, no matter what they do. And that can sometimes make it hard to gauge. But I saw a lot of, you're not wrong that they were a lot of whistle sacks in those early practices. They're still happening somewhat, but that not maybe at an alarming rate now. But I saw a lot of those being quarterbacks holding the ball too long, taking too long to make a decision, as opposed to the offensive line just imploding. And I would like to still see, I would reserve solid until I see someone like CJ Madden get in and become that sort of terror. Be that guy who other teams really think is a problem. Not like he's a good football player. Like, no, he's like, we're in trouble if we don't block him every single time, and maybe it's going to take two guys. Like, that's the standard that I think Purdue is aspiring to. And I don't know if they're there yet, but I think they could be. It's not one that I think, oh, this has a long way to go. This is sort of a shaky leaning towards solid.
Yeah, that's fair. I think very fair. Especially when you think about 2 years ago, Purdue had two of the top three sack leaders in the Big Ten. And
right
now, then you go from that and you have Will Helt, who maybe didn't have the numbers, but he was a guy that physically you're like, that's a guy that you have to focus on and not let get around the edge or you're in trouble. And CJ Madden was a guy that we thought was like that last year. He had some injury struggles a year ago. And I think that's, during that time, he's kind of reshaped his body to where the potential is there to be that kind of guy. But you're right. We haven't seen it happen consistently, and especially not in a game setting.
Moving over to D tackle, we can kind of keep this conversation going because this all kind of works together, obviously, with the defensive front. It's been, a lot of I don't know how often they will shift away from the 4-2-5 format. That is obviously the base defense that they work from. But in this four front look, you have with the ones, TJ Lindsey playing the three-tech, Jamarian Harkless, for obvious reasons, playing more the nose tackle. And then behind them, you have D'Amico Kennedy. And then some combination, Marcus Moore, Braylon Charles. We've seen a few guys in there. This is the position on the field. I mean, the defensive front as a whole, but especially defensive tackle, that you tend to see the most rotations just by nature. So I think a lot of guys are probably going to play. I gave this group a solid. They were the ones who, if I'm trying to pick which way to go, I leaned more that way just because I'm really optimistic about what TJ Lindsey can add from a pass rush perspective. I'm intrigued by what Jamarian Harkless is as just a body. And I think there's some upside in the depth here. You don't have to have great guys as you keep going down farther, but I think there's maybe some optimism that when you do have to rotate down to that second level or third level, that those guys can give you quality snaps. So I lean more on the solid side than the shaky side, but it's still a position group that I think is going to have to be good for this team because we'll get to the secondary in a little bit, but if you're not being disruptive up front, especially against the kind of schedule that Purdue is going to play, you're not really giving yourself a chance.
Yeah. A year ago, Jamarian Harkless was a guy who people would say he's a big body or, he was 350, 360, whatever it was. He was a big, big boy, and he still is, but he's shaved down a little bit, looks to be much better condition. But that was kind of where it stopped. He was a big body. Now he's a big body who defensive coordinator Mike Shear said last week plays hard every single rep, doesn't wear down like he used to. And then package that with TJ Lindsey. They had a real nice dynamic in the spring, really talked each other up as they say Batman and Robin or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And they've been, all through the spring and now all through the fall, the two guys on that interior working together most of the time. TJ Lindsey was a guy when he got here, was kind of unsure. He had defensive inexperience, but he's really added good weight to his body to where he's a big dude too, and one with a high projections. So I went with solid here as well, just based off those two, and then the guys behind them. This is not a position by nature that is going to rack up a ton of tackles, which if they do their jobs, that should be the case. Should be guys that, maybe get a couple sacks a season, but mostly you want them to be run stoppers or to create havoc and eat up blocks so that other guys can make plays. And I think that there is that capability with those two and then some of the guys behind them to do that.
Let's look at linebacker. This is a position that has just absolutely been set in stone since day one of the preseason camp. Manny Powell was already, I think, etched in stone from what he did in the spring and kind of the leadership that he showed and the presence that he commanded coming in from UNLV. And then they brought in his teammate, Charles Correa, and put him right beside him at the start of preseason camp. And those are your starting linebackers. I just think that's it. Those are the two guys. And it's been that way all camp. And behind them, Sanders Ellis, another transfer. Alex Sanford, who was here in the spring, played with the ones in the spring. One of the guys that they're waiting to find out, how soon he comes back. Carson Dean has been in there a little bit. I'm leaning solid with this group because of that. Really, it's just the Powell Correa combo. I'm giving them some benefit of the doubt that, as opposed to some other transfer situations, these guys have a connection now that goes back a couple of years. They know Mike Shearer's defense inside and out at this point. They are Mike Shearer linebackers. They are Barry Odom linebackers before they are Purdue linebackers. And there's sort of a nerve center built through the middle of this defense that is guys who know this defense. And they are kind of the nucleus of that. They get to be right in the middle of things, and they set things up, and they're an important part of communication. And last year, the one reason I almost still lean shaky was because linebacker was such a catastrophe last year. And Purdue has to be exponentially better at linebacker than it was a year ago to give itself a chance in any game. And so the standard is high, really, like what they have to clear. But I think there's reason to believe that they will, and that these guys can hold it down and be at least a solid Big Ten unit.
That's I like the dynamic that they've worked together before. I put shaky simply because Charles Correa hasn't played a whole lot in actual college games, but he does come in kind of ahead of the curve because he already knew what he was walking into, and he's got a pretty solid base. He talked last week, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was that we talked to him about having an uncle who was a second round draft pick, and that was kind of his motivation. Like, hey, I want to be able to do this. Grew up in Hawaii, where there's a lot of really good Polynesian football players come from there, and I think that he's a guy that could be a big breakout player for this team alongside Manny Powell. Sanders Ellis is the one that strikes me as, what can he do? Because he put up big numbers at a lower level, and then he levels up because his head coach, Eddie George, went and took the Bowling Green job. And he's like, I had this great year as a freshman. I want to go see how that translates. And I think he can be a kind of a game wrecker if he gets an opportunity. But right now, I think he's playing catch up to the guys that we just mentioned a little bit. Alex Sanford and Carson Dean, also guys who were Barry Odom linebackers from Arkansas days. So there is a lot of familiarity probably here with what Barry Odom wants to do, with what Mike Shearer wants to do with this linebackers group.
I went shaky at cornerback too. We've been talking a lot about the depth that this secondary has. Tony Grimes, another guy who is the cornerback on this team. We've seen early in camp, it was a lot of Ryan Turner with the ones. Lately, we've been seeing Hadori Hines, the sophomore from Indianapolis, get in there a little bit more. So I don't know. It might be a situation where they're rotating 3 guys or rotating 2 guys opposite Grimes, but those I think look like your top 3. Khalil Cummings, Travion Wright have been in there more as maybe your second level. And then we threw the nickels in here too, and Darius Coffey and with the 1, Sue Smith with the 2s for the most part. it's a group that I think I have probably leaned shaky on simply because for something else we'll talk about later. While they've looked good in practice, I don't know exactly how tough this receiver core is making it on them sometimes. And maybe I'll be proven wrong about that, but that's made me kind of question just how if they've got like top level to go in and take on the best receiving cores in the Big Ten. But I do think the depth is real. I do think they have probably multiple guys that they have some faith in at all these spots.
Yeah, and I think Tony Grimes is the real deal. And he's, he was highly regarded. He was a top 50 recruit coming out of high school, went to North Carolina, was an all ACC cornerback, went to Texas A&M, never got on the field there, went to UNLV, and he was, kind of back to his former self a little bit. And now you're asking him in his final year of college eligibility. A big thing for him is, he wants to impress pro scouts so that he can play football beyond college. And I think the leadership that he's shown, things of that sort are great. But a lot's going to be asked of him. He's going to have to lock down guys to give the defensive ends that we talked about earlier a chance to make plays on the quarterback. The fact that Ryan Turner and Hidari Hines, I would have said Ryan Turner was probably the number one guy. Then this week we see Hidari Hines out there a little bit. Hidari Hines is a guy that I really like. I liked him last year. He just was never going to play a lot as a true freshman. And he's a bigger corner. And he's made some plays. He made a real nice play today on a deep ball. But again, relative to, we'll get to the receivers later, maybe how good are the receivers that they're trying to lock down. But he's, and I said this on this podcast a couple weeks ago, Smiley Bradford, guys like that are what the basis of your program has to be. You have to bring in freshmen, develop them, and keep them 3 or 4 years for the program to have long, sustaining success. You can't just get a bunch of guys in their 4th, 5th, 6th years of eligibility every single year, or maybe you can in college football today, but it's not good for the longevity of your program, probably just to keep having that much turnover. So I think he's a piece of the future of this program. Right now, I like, Ryan Turner's experience at Boston College. He played briefly, I guess, in garbage time at Ohio State before that. But I would lean towards shaky as well, because we've talked about the years of college football experience this group has, and Darius Coffey playing at Memphis. Stu Smith was at Holy Cross and came to Purdue last year. But if you look at the overall stats over the careers of these guys, none of them really stand out. And for some of these guys, it's it's kind of their last chance. So that's not the case with Hines or with Turner. But maybe that's why they're opposite Grimes, to get that experience and whatnot. But I do want to see them, probably mostly that USC game where they're covering some elite talents and see how they can hold up. But for now, I'm going to have to go with shaky.
Yeah, sometimes you see guys move up because the guy above them is struggling. I think Hines has just been making plays, and he was making them practice both yesterday and today. And I had him down for like a couple of PBUs today in various drills and practice. Not that we're scrutinizing every single thing that happens because it's going on all over the field, but I see him making plays. So I was at the spring game. I wasn't doing an interview with this person, so I won't say who it was, but it's somebody who knows ball. And they were just chatting about the guys who were watching on the field, and they were looking at the cornerbacks specifically. And they, just from watching that, they had pointed out like, no, Hines he's got it. Like he can do this. So we'll see if that's something where he just kind of makes a statement and seizes a big role on this team. It looks like he's trying to here as camp kind of rolls to an end. We'll finish up with the safeties. I went shaky here also, but mostly just for the same reasons I said before. Miles Slusher and Taj Rael have been Slusher's been more of like the strong safety, Taj Rael more of the free safety, and then Richard Toney and Crew Wakely. It's a veteran group. It's a group that has actually played some ball. It's such a new thing with all these guys playing together, and I want to see what this looks like against real Big Ten offenses. And I don't know that Purdue is there yet. So until I see them do it against some of the better offenses they're going to have to face this year, I'm going to have to lean shaky.
Yeah, I would go shaky as well. Taj Rail is the guy that played a lot at Old Dominion, didn't play much last year at Memphis, or didn't play, exclusively at Memphis. But he's a guy that's been in with that first unit. Um, and Miles Slusher, the best years he had were playing with Barry Odom as the defensive coordinator. And then last year he didn't have that, and the numbers weren't the same. But he's a guy that's come in. He's made an impact throughout camp. He's a guy that's been praised by multiple coaches for what he's doing, and I think that the potential is there for this group to be a solid moving forward. And Crew Wakely is a guy that's played a lot of football at Utah State and at BYU. A guy who's also been through some life experiences as a solar panel salesman, door to door. So real life experience. He's married. You've got multiple guys in the secondary who have children. Really unique group between the corners and safeties. I think I counted 9 guys who are in their 5th or 6th year of college football. So that's a lot of experience, but does that translate to being on the field? And one thing that I did ask Coach Clark, the secondaries coach, last week, because one of the things that I think Crew Wakely said was that the talent discrepancy between the top and bottom is, very minimal. And I said, what are you looking for when everybody's kind of that bunched together? And he said it's something about the communication. So that's a big thing. How will they all communicate with each other, which is probably why it's vital to have 2 UNLV transfers at linebacker who are, leading that charge. But I'm going to have to, reserve judgment until we see this secondary go against some of the better opponents on Purdue's schedule. That USC and then that Notre Dame game will tell a lot, I think.
And this is also a group where you look at where these guys came from. Memphis program that wins, pretty regularly, like a 10-win team, 9-10-win team. TCU, BYU, like teams that are accustomed to winning games. And we'll see what that means if any of that sort of mindset can translate to this defense. But I also think that when we revisit this at midseason, which I think we should do, like, middle of the year, do another pod like this and look back and say, we called it this before the season. What is it now? It wouldn't shock me if we thought all those groups were solid, but we'll see, because again, I think it's one of the things that's, I can tell you who the better players are from that group, just from what we're seeing them do in practice. It's harder to gauge what they're going to do when they're actually playing against Big Ten opponents, Notre Dame, those sorts of teams. Let's go offense. Sam, is there any doubt in your mind that Ryan Brown will be named the starting quarterback this week?
Absolutely not. I think that, now the thing was they wanted to go through a Saturday scrimmage. They wanted to go through another Saturday scrimmage. Those scrimmages are now gone, and you have to have, and we've asked this with multiple coaches, a quarterback so that everybody and maybe they do, maybe the people on the team know who the starting quarterback is, and they just haven't, come out publicly and said it yet. But you have to have that dynamic with the receivers knowing who the number 1 quarterback is, the linemen knowing who the number 1 quarterback is, specifically the center, the tight end. But what we saw this week has been pretty telling that Ryan Brown is the guy. And that's kind of what we thought all along, but you never got that verification from Barry Odom or from Darren Henshaw, the quarterback's coach, or from Josh Henson, the offensive coordinator. And I think that's coming this week, because you do ultimately, first of all, you have to put out a depth chart next week. You don't have to, I guess, but they will put out a depth chart next week that will name a starting quarterback. And I would assume that it's going to be public before then.
I mean, they haven't been whittling down the reps this week like I thought they might, at least not yet. But what they have done is Ryan Brown goes first in everything. Anything that 2 guys aren't doing the same thing at the same time, right? Ryan Brown has gone first in everything, and that this week is the first time that's happened all preseason camp. So if there was a last indication sitting out there, I thought that was it. I thought he had been performing the best of that group, maybe the most consistently of that group, though there's been inconsistency with the group in general. But I thought he has just displayed the best skill set to be ready for opening day. And the other thing that I saw today, I don't know if you picked up on this, or just in the last couple of days, you start to walk with a little bit of a swagger, like when you're the starting quarterback and you're the starting quarterback. I've seen that play out at other places where technically they haven't named one of the three guys, but one guy is walking around that place like he's the starting quarterback. It's not being cocky. It's just the confidence of it and being, sure in your skin. And I see that right now from Ryan Brown. So Ryan Brown, the starter, and then I don't know how they will put the depth chart after that. It may be a Malachi Singleton or Bennett Meredith. I don't know if they'll give us a definite 1, 2, 3 who will be the number 2 quarterback. I will say that I think that it is harder to pick who is the number 2 than it is to pick who is the number 1. And that's one of the reasons why I ultimately gave this a shaky grade, just because Ryan Brown has started 2 games and one of them was really intriguing and one of them was not. And nobody else has much experience. So they're asking a lot and of some unproven guys, and it might just take a while for it to click.
Yeah, this is definitely shaky. And, the fact that Purdue went through the spring and didn't settle on a starting quarterback when it brought in 3 guys to compete for the job. And then you bring Ryan Brown back from his, sabbatical at North Carolina or whatever it was, whatever you want to call it. And then he comes in and clearly is the guy that's above the others. Leads you to say shaky just because of that. But also, I do think Ryan Brown is the guy making the most consistent plays, the right plays more than other guys. It's not like he's going out there and being Drew Brees or anything. There's still a lot of faults that he's got to get better at as well, or just some inconsistencies that, right now I'm not ready to say like, man, he's going to go out there and tear apart Ball State in week 1 because we've got to see him go out there. He still, as a starter, hasn't won a game. And, the game that he played a lot with Bennett Meredith, alternating back and forth even 2 years ago at Northwestern, they didn't win that game. Probably should have, but didn't win that game because you end up with 15 points. So there's still a lot to be desired there, but I think that this is, again, a position that we reevaluate 6 games in, and we could say like, hey, Ryan Brown turned out to be the right choice and a pretty good quarterback. I'd give this group a solid.
Yeah, I was on the verge of still just calling this concerning because of the just such unknown nature of all these guys and the fact that while there is some gamesmanship going on here and they don't want to tip their opponent's hand as to who the starter is and they want to keep everybody, maybe this is even more important, they want all these guys to keep competing as if the job is on the line up until the last moment. And maybe they're not as concerned about the cohesiveness that you need extra days for that. They don't see a big difference between 7 days and 5 days, and maybe that's a fair thing. But also nobody seized this job. Like nobody at some point in camp was, until very recently, was like, oh, that's your guy. And that's something that whoever does win this job, if it's Ryan Brown, that's still going to be on their shoulders a little bit to go out and say, no, I clearly was the right guy, and here's why, and do it with your performance. So, but I'm giving them some benefit of the doubt just because we have seen against a really good team at Illinois last year, you saw that Ryan Brown's upside. And I think this coaching staff, certainly the circumstances under which he would be doing it this year are much preferable than to the ones that he was in last year. And I think those things could help him potentially put something together. Who would you pick right now, like gun to your head? If Ryan Brown in the middle of the first quarter, if President Trump declares him to be the emperor of football and he has to retire, who takes the next snap for Purdue?
I would say Malachi Singleton, just because I think he's more dynamic, can do a lot of different things. Bennett Meredith is a safe pick, but I don't think that he's a guy that, you can go out there and get the big play from. And I think that still has to be an element where the other team has to respect that part of the offense.
I do think it's possible that if you needed someone mid-game, you go with the more seasoned, higher floor guy. But if you had a week to prepare, then maybe it's Malachi Singleton's turn. I don't know what they would do in the middle of a game. I think that would be an intriguing question, one that they obviously are trying to hope never comes up. Devin Amakobi is the starting running back. And basically just based on him alone, I'm calling this solid. You've got a respected starting running back who has performed in the Big Ten. That I think takes you to solid. I am still, though, intrigued by the upside of what we've seen from Antonio Harris. He had as good of a first week of camp as anybody, except maybe Ahmad Branch among the skill position guys. And then Malachi Thomas, and just the experience that he has and the reliability that I think he gives you as a number 2.5 option. And that's another one that I don't know how they'll do this on the depth chart. It could be Malachi Thomas or Antonio Harris behind the obvious no-brain starter.
Yeah, this is without question a solid. And if there was ever an inkling of going elite, it would be here, just because Devin Maccabee's put up good numbers on bad teams. His best season did come as a freshman on the best team Purdue's had in a while, but he has. I think he has consistently gotten better throughout his career. Just the numbers don't tell you that story, because he's had banged up offensive line 2 years ago and was splitting reps with Tyrone Tracy. Last year he was just on a very bad team that couldn't move the ball at all, couldn't pick up 3 yards on a 3rd and 2 if they had to at times. So. But I think he's a very good college running back. Beyond this, we'll see. But I think there's a lot of incentive there to make him a featured player and maybe chase that Mike Allstott record if things are going well. I don't think you just chase the record for the sake of chasing the record. But if you can get a flow of season and it just kind of comes organically, that would be great. And I like that there are guys pushing behind him. Antonio Harris, like you mentioned. Malachi Thomas was brought in to be kind of the next guy, I guess, that was the transfer. Even though Tyrone Tracy transferred and was playing receiver initially, he was a guy that had experience and became kind of the 1-2 option there. And then last year, Purdue brought in Reggie Love to package with that. And now you've got potentially 3 really good running backs that you've got this little nucleus. But we have been told that Devin Maccabee will carry the load. And that was no surprise to us. So I think having that guy who's that experienced and just, maybe a guy that is ready finally to endure what it means to be a featured back. He's 200 plus pounds now. Earlier in his career, he mentioned numerous times how hard it was for him to put on weight. And I think he's finally gotten to an age where, in his early 20s, I guess now, where he's able to do that. And the years of the weight room training are paying off.
If Devin Maccabee doesn't get that record, if he gets close and falls short, it won't be because of anything this team does or doesn't do. It'll be because of the offensive malpractice that was visited upon that team last season and the fact that they couldn't get first downs and keep him on the field more. That's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. So, we'll see. I don't know if he has enough runway in a 12-game season to get there, and I don't know if this team has enough opportunity with this schedule to make it a 13-game season. But we'll see. We'll see, because I think you're right. If the offense does click, he will be the guy who is featured in it more than anybody else. So except possibly Ryan Brown, just because of his running ability. So we'll see. At wide receiver, I think we've decided the top 3 guys on any given day: Denila Morissette, Ahmad Branch, Michael Jackson III. Behind them, E.J. Horton, Nitro Tuggle, Jesse Watson, Corey Smith. Talking to Cornell Ford last week, he was talking about could be up to 8 people that he rotates. Coaches say that sort of thing a lot, and then 8 usually actually means more like 6 max. And then when it's a game that matters, it usually means 3. They usually have their best 3 guys, and they barely ever come off the field. But I'm going shaky here. Cornell Ford was not enthusiastic about the performance of his group coming out of the first scrimmage, and we haven't talked to him since then. But I have not been impressed with this group at all this week. Moments here and there. There was a deep ball today that Jesse Watson hauled in against the twos that went for a long touchdown. But just so many drops. And so many times where I've seen Ryan Brown have to go and stop and kind of yell at somebody for not doing what they're supposed to do, or reacting in such a way that that wasn't what that was supposed to be. And obviously you'll have to check that body language when you get into games, but I think in practice it's fine. And I think all I've seen is that I think Cornell Ford was not wrong when he was telling us last week, these guys aren't catching the ball enough. That's not what you want to hear midway through camp. It's certainly not what you want to hear when you're coming up 10 days away from kickoff or whatever we are. And this quarterback group, even if Ryan Brown plays well, does not have this whole offense doesn't have the margin for error to be dropping first downs, to be dropping potential breakaways. And I've just seen too much of that in camp. And until they clean that up, I think it's shaky, almost shaky at best.
Yeah, shaky is the grade or label, I guess, I gave to this group as well. Armand Branch was the guy early in camp that everybody was raving about. And like, who's the guy who's caught your eye? Who's stood out so far? And everybody was saying Armand Branch. And he's been a guy that's been consistent, been a playmaker, and a guy that I think bet on this coaching staff to kind of be a breakout player, because he didn't get a lot of opportunity last year, entered the transfer portal. And then when Barry Odom got hired, he immediately removed himself from the transfer portal and stayed at Purdue. And it's probably going to pay off for him in terms of individual playing time, and probably statistically, Michael Jackson III is a guy who performed well at USC, I guess. He was serviceable. I think he had 49 catches in 3 seasons there. At Georgia last year, 1 catch for 10 yards. The word that Cornell Ford did use for him was wow, when asked about him. And I've seen him make incredible plays throughout camp, but also I've seen him, sometimes just disappear. And you're kind of like, hey, where's Michael Jackson III? He's a guy that's made all these spectacular plays, and then you can't do that inconsistently and be a big time player. So I think he can be. I think that you've seen the potential to do that, but I want to see it more consistently. Denalon Morissette is a guy who intrigues me. I'm actually writing about the receiver breakdown right now as we speak, or not as we speak, but before this podcast, and as soon as we get off of here. When a lot of guys last year, the receivers were god awful and didn't help the quarterbacks at all. I don't think the offensive line helped the quarterback. It was just a disaster all the way around. And probably we could use some other language to describe what we had to watch over a 12-game season a year ago. But the fact that he stayed at Purdue, coming from Georgia, where he was on a national championship team and played a little bit as a true freshman, was at Georgia 2 years, comes to Purdue, probably looking for more opportunity. And he catches 11 passes for a 1-win team. And that cannot be what he was thinking he was getting into when he's like, oh, I'll go to Purdue, and thinking probably I'm going to be more featured at a school like that than I would be at Georgia, where I'm kind of lost in the shuffle right now. But the fact that he stayed tells me that he trusts the staff, and he thinks that he can be he's probably not going to be the guy, but he can be a key cog in this receiver core if everything goes well. I do like that Purdue added Nitro Tuggle and Corey Smith, because they played high school football in Indiana. And I think it's valuable to have as many of those guys who are top tier recruits as you can. And Nitro Tuggle was a 4-star guy who went to Georgia and came back to his home state. And I just think that that's key to kind of keep that those ties to Indiana high school football programs when you're at Purdue or in Indiana. Maybe not so much at Notre Dame, but even like a Ball State, places like that. But you're right. Jesse Watson is a home run threat. His body's not real big. You wonder how, maybe that holds up if he takes some shots. Chauncey Magwood's a name we didn't mention, but he's a guy that in the spring, I think, was talked about. And then he's been here throughout the fall. EJ Horton's a 6th-year guy, but man, I think I was expecting more. Maybe that's just my own self-evaluation or projection of what I thought Purdue would get out of him. And so far, I haven't seen it match up to a guy who, lit up. It looks like he lit up Oklahoma State a few years ago when he was at West Virginia. So I need to see more from this group before I'm willing to even consider calling it a solid group.
Horton, to me, epitomizes a lot of what's going on with that group, because I think the talent is clearly there. They were raving about his speed and everything in the spring, that he can play ball. He's just not consistent enough in the execution right now. But I will also say he was staying after practice to catch extra balls today. So that to me is a sign of accountability. And maybe it would have been there last year too. I don't know, but that's like one example of a guy who is being accountable, who I think knows that there's an issue there, and he's trying to correct it. So good on him. The one position group that I gave concerning grade to is tight end. They told us George Burhan would be ready for the start of the season. Barry Odom told us that. I know he told us that in Vegas. I can't remember if he told us that earlier than that too. But I was always surprised to hear that things were so good as far as getting him back because of the how bad that injury looked when it happened in the spring. And I just still don't know what he is to start the year and how soon he is 100%. And without that, I don't really know who they're counting on, especially from a receiving standpoint. From a blocking standpoint, I think they have some options, but that does limit the versatility of this offense a little bit. Rico Walker has stepped up here, I think, in the last week and started to do some impressive things and flash some things. And then you've got a bunch of guys, whether it's Christian Earls, with Luca Cuccinelli in there, like they're bigger bodies, and I think they can block for this team and help this team run the ball. I just don't know how consistent they will be as receivers. I don't know how athletically dynamic they are compared to, let's say, Big Ten nickels and linebackers. And that's an element I think this offense has to have. Any Big Ten offense has to have. So I'm going to say concerning here until I see more from George Burhan and I get a better indication of what some of these other guys can actually do in a passing situation.
Yeah, and I'm on par with you here. I went concerning. One thing I did say I was talking to Tom Dienhart at Golden Black today at practice, and I said, the tight end group, there's a couple guys in there. When you pull up to Notre Dame Stadium, you want a couple of those guys to be the first ones to get off the bus there because they have the look and appearance of like, man, that guy looks like he can play. But as pass catchers, we haven't seen it so much. Christian Moore, we can throw in here. He's a fullback. He's listed as a tight end, but he's going to be a blocking guy in short yardage situations.
Yeah, it's going to be goal line and 4th and inches sort of stuff, like get in there and run gap scheme stuff. Yeah.
But Rico Walker, I think, athletically looks like the best of the ones that are out there. I think the world of George Burhan, just based off of one half against Indiana 2 years ago, what he could be. But he's been injury prone, unfortunately for him, and hasn't had a chance to consistently go out there and prove it. He got hurt early last season, got hurt in the spring, and now trying to rehab and come back from that injury. And we've been told that he would be ready for game one. Right now, I'll believe it when I see it, basically. So until you find a consistent performer out of this group, I think it's obviously concerning. But like you said, Rico Walker was a guy who I was intrigued by coming in. And then now that he's out there running routes and playing with the first team offense and doing some things, I think he could be a pretty good option. But I really don't know what to make of this group yet. So fair or not, that's what I have to go with is concerning.
And the good thing they have, and I know Barry Odom shot down a question I asked along these lines as it related to the quarterback position. And I agree that it's a different scenario altogether. And I think he gave the right answer to the question I was asking. Mostly that, like, well, you've got a couple of games early in the season. Could you take the quarterback competition into the season? And he very quickly was like, you got to be kidding. Like, he didn't say it, but like the interpretation is this team was 1-11 last year. We can't take a chance that we lose any game. We got to have our best quarterback on the field.
If it was not 2-0, it will lose this fan base will already be looking at basketball season.
Yeah. So, but at other positions that aren't like super essential, the way a quarterback is, I think they've got some leeway to play with to make sure guys are 100%. That's not just tight end. That could apply to any number of other positions. So we'll see. But I do think Rico Walker is an important person potentially for this season, just because when I look at that group behind Burhan and even Burhan to some extent, but definitely the group behind him, Walker kind of stands out as far as like what he could be. And that was something that Barry Odom said last week, that like if he figures this out, something special could happen. I don't know if it happens by the end of the season. He's been in a couple Power 4 programs before, though. Like he was a 4-star prospect. He's got some upside. and we'll see if it gets a chance to be utilized this year. Which brings us to the offensive line. And a position that I think we thought might be fully settled by now, and in some ways it is. Like Joey Tonona is going to be the starting left tackle. Jalen St. John has clearly, the plan has been all along for him to start at left guard. Baking Coley is your starting right tackle. Those three positions are set. Now, there has been some movement on the other two interior spots. And some of it has been guys who were limited in practice or whatever on a given day. Some of it has been that they were having some snap issues at one point in camp and they needed to shore things up. So between Ethan Trent, Mark Nave, Gio Vaccaro, and Braden Joyner, some combination of those four guys are going to be the center and the right guard and will be the backups at those positions. But as we sit here, again, with 1 day left to go in true camp schedule for them, we don't know who's starting, and I don't think they know who's starting. That's one of the ones where I think they're telling us the truth when they say they don't know 100% for sure what that starting lineup will look like on opening day. Real quickly, just behind them, Jude McCoskey at left tackle, Hank Purvis at left guard, Marcus Easley at right tackle, and then the other two guys from that interior group that I was talking about would be your twos. I'm still calling this solid. I believe in the upside of Tonona and St. John and the relative cohesiveness that this group has built. But it's a little bit of a soft solid, and they're going to have to show that the depth is here the way that we think it is, because I think it's probably going to be tested early this season.
Yeah, I went solid as well, mostly because I think that having, if you have 8 linemen, you can really do some things there. Think back to some of the best Purdue teams, they would just exclusively go 5. And it looked like at the start of this camp, Purdue was settled on its 5 that had been the same 5 from the spring. And we were like, oh, okay, this is already figured out. And now it's just fine tuning that group together. Then we started seeing some issues with long snapping out of shotgun, things like that. And they started to mix and match. And some guys who hadn't been fully healthy were, getting back in the mix, whatever it might be. And then you started seeing the shuffling. Ethan Trent has played both guard and center. So has Gio Vaccaro. And both of those guys are experienced at both of those spots, dating back to either Canadian football or high school or whatever. So you like the flexibility there. Barry Odom is big on saying we cross-train a lot of guys, meaning we want guys that can play tackle and guard or guard and center. And that, doesn't just flow to there. It goes to being a corner or a safety, things like that. But that flexibility gives you the best option to play. The thing I really like about what potentially could be the starting lineup, which maybe it's good, maybe it's not when we think about how bad Purdue was last year, but you have the King Coley, Joey Tonona, and Ethan Trent, who were in the program previously that was really bad. And one of those guys was a walk-on. One of those guys was in a catastrophic accident that nearly cost him his football career. And then another guy is kind of a homegrown talent. And they stayed, and now they've looked like they could be very crucial parts of being, part of a really bad team and then helping to try to build that program back up. And that's intriguing to me. And then some of the other guys you mentioned, Mark Nave played in the SEC, Braden Joyner played in the SEC. You have guys easily played in the SEC, guys who have experienced football at winning programs, and now they're here trying to become a winning program collectively, and guys who have experience. I think Braden Joyner maybe was a starter at Auburn last year. Is that right?
Yeah, he started 5 games last year. He was a guard at Auburn, though, right, and has been working at center a little bit more. In fact, I asked Vance Weiss about that today, and he said, well, I knew he was a center right away. So that seems to be where Purdue maybe likes him the most, but he can do both. And they're going to need that versatility. You've got to have more than 5 starters. You've got to have like 8 starters and pick the best 5 to start with. But I think you're right, and I hadn't really thought about that until today. Excuse me. But the idea that 3 of the 5, and after all this roster turnover, that 3 of your 5 starting offensive linemen could be guys who were in that group last year. That's really unique on this roster. And maybe only the running back room is the only other room that even looks like that, where you have that many guys who are familiar with this program from last year, at least that percentage of the guys in the room. But if you get those 3 guys in some way, and then Jalen St. John at left guard, who might be the best lineman they have, and is certainly, I think at this point, the most accomplished lineman that they have. And then you're plugging somebody else in at center who has started power conference games, or at least has come from a power conference situation. Like, yeah, you start to see the stability there. They're going to need some good luck on health, as everybody does, but I think there's reason to think that offensive line can move the ball enough on the ground and give any of these quarterbacks enough time, because they're mobile. They don't have a statue back there that they're protecting. They're going to have some leeway there just because of how mobile the quarterback is, and that combination can take a step forward from when it almost has to from what this offense was last year.
Yeah, and Jude McCoskey is a guy who started at Indiana State. And again, that's a lower level, and obviously a team that even last year wasn't as talented as what Purdue was last year. But he's a big body dude with a lot of college football experience that he's definitely more than serviceable as well, and you can throw him in that mix if for whatever reason you have to go to a backup tackle.
My last word on this, I guess, would be that these are the analysis that we've come up with from watching basically every practice. I missed a few. I think you missed one, but we've had someone there at literally every practice. And again, thanks to Barry Odom for doing what most coaches are too paranoid to do, which is let the media actually in to see what they're going to be talking about. And I don't know that last year at this time we were talking about Max Clare as like one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten based on what we'd seen in camp. Like, some of this is going to be, camp and the things you do in practice has one mission, and then what you have to do to move the ball up the field on a given play or series or whatever is a different thing sometimes. So we could maybe just see some guys emerge situationally once the ball actually matters, once the kickoff actually happens on August 30th against Ball State. Any passing thoughts, Sam, as we shut this down?
No, I think that the Purdue is in a, I guess not an enviable position because there's no expectations for this team. If Purdue wins a Big Ten game, it's significantly better than what it did a year ago. So, there's nobody on a preseason All Big Ten team from this roster. So I think you have the opportunity to say there's a huge chip on your shoulder. Go out and, it's not like Barry Odom wants to go out and say, hey, let's have a 4-win season, and that's great. They're going to try to win every single game. But if you win 2 games and then you get on a little bit of a roll, and even if you're somewhat competitive against USC or, you show that you can compete with a Notre Dame, the interest is there, and maybe the momentum, and then maybe the self-belief in some ways. Now, a lot of these guys have played at other programs and won, so I think that's going to be there. But there's an opportunity maybe to start building something sooner than people anticipated. But right now, Purdue is playing with house money.
Yeah, I actually have a thing that I've already written. I think it'll be on our site on Monday. It's kind of our season preview take. And it's basically saying, okay, I know Barry Odom says I can't think of this in terms of anything less than winning as many games as possible. He shouldn't. And for all the reasons that he mentions and more. But I do think there are ways that this program can show some proof of concept in less than ideal circumstances as far as putting a roster together on the fly against a fairly tough schedule still. Can you show some stability at quarterback and some potential upside to get some special play there again? I found a stat. I was looking for a year where Purdue won at least 8 games with a quarterback who was not either first team All Big Ten at some point in his career or would go on to start multiple NFL games. So I was like, just that combination, just to win just 8 games, not like go to the Rose Bowl, like 8 wins. And I got back to 1950 and just stopped looking because it doesn't exist. Like, you can't win in spite of quarterback play at Purdue. So they have to get good production from that position. And I think that it's time you have to start setting up your identity. And I think it's okay if that identity is defense. That I'm not saying you can have a bad offense, but I think it's okay if you have a coach who comes in and has a real defensive background and a real defensive plan and makes the defense one of the best defenses in the Big Ten. And when you look at some of the teams that have had a top 5 statistical defense in the Big Ten the last few years, it's not just the elites. It's IU, it's Minnesota. Iowa does it year after year after year. So I don't know why Purdue also with the right coaching staff in place couldn't get to that point and just buy yourself some wiggle room on offense that they haven't had for a long time. So those are a couple of things that I've had in mind. Just, what can they accomplish this year that pays off down the line, even if it doesn't turn into a lot of wins this year? Because I think they could be better than they were last year, but in some cases the gap was so big that won't necessarily translate into a lot of wins. But we'll start seeing for sure what this looks like on August 30th. So we will come to you next week. I'm not sure exactly what day yet. We're still figuring out some schedule things with Purdue, but we'll be bringing you Boilers Extra on a weekly basis. We'll be talking basketball too. We'll be talking probably some other sports sprinkled in there. Purdue volleyball will be getting started pretty soon, and Sam is definitely inside on what's going on with that program. So from Nathan Baird for Sam King, this was Boilers Extra. We'll talk to you again soon.